So if you're thinking about cameras, take a moment to think about, how does the camera feel? How does it feel in your hand? What does it do for you? Does it bring you joy? Does it feel seamless? Does the camera ultimately melt away and allow you to just create? Is that what's happening for you? Or is there frustration around something? G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. And look, if this is your first time here, it is lovely to meet you. And stick around, stay, join the community, subscribe. I'd love to see you again, and we can talk about what we love, which is making images. Passionate about creation, passionate about sharing how we see the world, passionate about telling stories, passionate about having the opportunity for what's within our mind's eye to come out and to be shared with the world. There is nothing more empowering or enriching than sharing what's within and then being embraced by your community for your sense of place in the world. And photography allows us to share our sense of place in the world. Now today, I don't want to talk about cameras. I don't want to talk about tech specs. I want to talk about the camera as an extension of you. And for those that are new, I'll just quickly explain my background, where I'm coming from, so you know my context. Because of course, every single video I make comes from my context. I am not a reviewer. I don't get sent 100 cameras a year to go through them and to work out the technicalities of it all. I'm an end user who's been a professional photographer for 30 years, using cameras for almost 40 years, and has had to navigate the difficult world of being a self-employed photographer, publisher, and entrepreneur. And how do you invest in something that's going to stand the test of time with you? It's simply just not a technological question. It is so much more. The technological part of it is the tip of the iceberg, and so much else sits below that. And today's video is about the camera as an extension of you. And this is critical for a professional, who I am, or an enthusiast who might spend a day in the forest waiting for a bird, waiting for something to happen. Our tools need to be an extension of us. It needs to be distilled to the absolute point where working with a camera is innate. It's simply an extension of you. You don't have to think about it. Nor do you not have to think about it, but there's no fatigue that comes from 8, 10, 12, 14 hours of your gear in your hand and your eye up to the eyepiece. This is critical. And these things, which are basically under the umbrella of ergonomics, but sometimes it's even more than ergonomics, these things rarely exist on a spec sheet. Spec sheets don't talk about grip size. They don't talk about button placement. They don't talk about it. Yet these innate things are far more important to someone like me than a whole lot of other things. And I want to share a story with you as to where this all started. Where did my journey start with thinking this way about cameras? But before I share that story, I want to thank somebody just a few days ago. A fantastic man, a doctor by the name of Mohammed. He reached out to me. And he lives in Malta, so it was just a joy to be talking to the other side of the world. He lives in Malta, and he said to me, Matt, I'm so distressed. There's all this negative noise on the internet, in YouTube, about Nikon. And Nikon means so much to me. The experience of using my Nikon is just a joy. I just go out, I shoot, I love what I do. I love the way it feels. I cannot imagine using any other system. And I share his feelings around how it feels to work with this system. And over my 35, 40 years, I have worked with probably roughly half the systems around in one way or another. And I get it. And not everybody does it the same way. My story started, I'd had Pentax cameras from the mid-80s through till 1997. I'd had the Pentax K1000, the Pentax P30, and the Pentax SFXN. And I had decided, I'd been a professional for 7 years at that point, making a living out of photography. It was like it was time for me to get one of the big boys. And clearly at that point in time, the big boys were Canon and Nikon. That's how it was back in 1997. Now, at the time, Canon was known for having, I think, slightly faster acquiring focus. So one of those metrics that's like, okay, so, I don't know, it gets focus 1/4 of a second faster than the Nikon or whatever. I don't remember. Don't remember what the metrics were. And full well knowing what my use case was, slightly faster focus didn't factor in things for me. It didn't factor at all. So I went to the store. I cannot remember the Canon of that time that I looked at. Maybe someone could tell me what it was in 1997, the flagship Canon. But of course I can remember the Nikon. There was the Nikon F4 and the Nikon F5 had just come out. I had these cameras in my hands. And I was trying to work out, do I get the Canon slightly faster? And I literally remember talking to the sales assistant. And I've got the Nikon in my hand, and it's got a little wheel at the back to change shutter. And a little wheel at the front, under my finger, like right under where my finger is sitting. Both of these things are right under where my fingers are sitting. And I can change shutter and aperture right there and then. Up until that point, my Pentaxes, I'd either changed a dial on the top, 1/8, 1/16, 1/30, 1/100th, whatever it was. And the aperture was always on the lens. That's the way it was. And this was the first time ever that literally under my fingers, without having to move, without having to look, without having to stop shooting, without even having to put a second hand on the camera, I could adjust manually. And I had always photographed manually. And I still do, 23 years later, still photograph fully manually, all the time. So it was like, okay, well that's one. Now the Canon's got this other experience. There's the aperture at the front there, under my hand here. But the shutter was this giant dial. I couldn't do it one-handed. It was a much harder and more difficult move. It just wasn't as easy and as seamless and just an extension. It was actually uncomfortable to do it. It was a bigger, different move. So that was it for me. It was like the way Nikon had designed it was simply an extension of myself. There was just almost nothing I had to do to make this work. So it was a simple decision. For someone who might have a camera in my hand for 8, 10, 12, 15 hours, I wanted it to be as easy, as simple, and causing the least amount of fatigue, and it being an extension of myself. And thus, what happens at that point when it's an extension of yourself? The camera actually melts away. And you're not thinking about buttons. You're not thinking about where they are and what you've got to do, and geez, that's a bit painful after the 700th time of doing it. You're not thinking about that at all. It's just melting away, and you are creating images. And that's where the joy comes from. Because the camera becomes an extension of you. That's what happens. It becomes an extension of you, and the process of creating the image, you can just completely focus on that part. And I think it's from around the F5 that Nikon settled upon basically the design and the structure that we are seeing still today, almost 25 years later. And if we look across the F5 to the D1, the D2, the D3, the D4, the D5, the D6, the D700, the D850, the D800, D810, etc., all of these cameras have the same design language. And all of these cameras, the buttons are all in the same place. And what Nikon have done over that period of time is they've very, very minorly improved on the great design that they created. It might have been before the F5. I don't know the F4 or the F3 well enough. But from the great design that was created back then, they've just distilled it and refined it to the point where today, even from the D3 onwards, the changes have been so minor. For instance, changing something as simple as the angle of the shutter button. And that angle change actually has made a big difference. It feels significantly better when it's on. It's less up on top and just a less up on top and a bit more around the front, more at 45 degrees. But they continued with these refinements, and now we're at a point 25 or perhaps more years later where it is distilled to where it's at its simplest and feeling most natural and logical resolution. Yet it's taken years, even for Nikon, years of testing, years of having their cameras with pros and enthusiasts and working with feedback to get this experience to melt away. So when you're using your camera, it is simply joyful. You simply can focus on the moment and the capturing. That's the feelings. That's the feelings that this video is about. It feels good. It feels joyful. And I feel ridiculously lucky, in all honesty, to have made that choice all these years ago. And this design language exists in the Z cameras. They are a lot smaller because that is what people have demanded. And for those perhaps with bigger hands, the grip. I love putting the vertical grip, well, let's call it the battery extension grip, on the Z7 or the Z6. Just gives you a bit more space for your hands down the bottom. It's not necessary. I was using the Z7 with the 70 to 200 this morning. Felt great. I just want to end this by saying, as a professional, and again, this is who I am, who has to work sometimes 8, 10, 12, 14 hours with a camera in your hand, what's critical is you don't get fatigue. What's critical is it's just an extension of yourself. You might take 5,000 frames in that one day, and this thing just has to do what you want, and it's critical that it doesn't tire you out, and it's critical that everything is in 8. And this is part of the Nikon experience. And of course, we're all different. Some people may get this experience with a different system, and that's completely fine. I'm not saying that others aren't capable of doing this. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm sharing with you my story after almost 25 years going through probably something like 20 different camera designs in that time. This is something that's critical. This is something that you only really actually understand that you're missing it when you try another system that doesn't do it, that literally just hasn't gone through this 25 years of refinement. And at that point, when you are confronted with the difference, it is profound. That's my opinion. And I would deeply and respectfully say to you, anyone can argue with me if they want, but they can't argue with how I feel and how I react to the tool, which is an extension of me, which allows me to be creative in any way that I can think of, as fast and as seamlessly and as easy as possible. That's how I feel. And I've got a generation of experience and outcomes and success to back how I feel. This is not a metric. This is a use case applied outcome. So if you're thinking about cameras, take a moment to think about, how does the camera feel? How does it feel in your hand? What does it do for you? Does it bring you joy? Does it feel seamless? Does the camera ultimately melt away and allow you to just create? Is that what's happening for you? Or is there frustration around something? And that may be the answer. You might be just like me and you go into a store and you try out 3 different cameras, you put them in your hand, you adjust the things that you like to adjust because maybe you're not interested in shutter and aperture like I am. And you work out what feels good. I think it's pretty important because cameras are pretty similar in this day and age. And there'll always be one company that's technologically a little bit ahead of the other, and they're always doing this. This is what's always happening. Anyway. All right, everybody, as usual, thank you. It's been great to share my feelings. and I'm really passionate about this. It's funny, I haven't really thought about it. So again, I would like to thank Mohammed for separating kind of the technology with actually the experience of being a photographer and going out there, because I would like to think that you and me, we actually spend more time with our cameras in our hands creating and walking and experiencing and enjoying than we do talking about specs. I would hope so. Please, let's use these beautiful tools more than we talk about them. That'd be cool. So if this is your first time here, it is very lovely to meet you, and please subscribe. I'd love to see you again. Please share if you think it's worth sharing. Please like, because that helps get the word out there, and we'll see each other again if you do. And hit the bell if you want to hear when the next video arrives. All right, and if you want to see over 200 episodes right now, the sun is an hour from the horizon. Still 2.5 more weeks of lockdown to go. All right, see ya.